Mead Lumber. What is Mead Lumber?
Well, so buddy of mine, Chad Omar. So I know Chad through the whole girls wrestling world.
Yeah.
So Beatrice guy, love Chad. We trade messages all the time. Big podcast fan.
Okay.
And so he sends me a text. He's like, "Hey, what are yours and Travis's t-shirt sizes?" And so I'm like, "Oh, okay, here you go. No big thing." I texted you, asked you, you told me, "Hey, tell him this." And so like a week later, I get this swag box in the mail. And so Chad sent up just that with a note that said, "Hey, Rob and Travis, thanks for such a great show to listen to. Keep up the great work. The boys and I appreciate it all. Go Big Red. Chad Omar, Mead Lumber." And it was like T-shirts and hats and insulated cups and koozies. Anyway, it was a nice set of stuff. Absolutely appreciate it. But just, he's a happy listener, and he and his guys appreciate the show and just wanted to say thank you.
Chad, thanks so much. And just to let you know, Chad, we're going to need some lumber here pretty quick. What are we going to need, Owen? Like 2x4s? We're going to need some drywall. We're going to need a whole bunch of stuff here pretty soon. So, Chad, go ahead and reach out to Rob and give him your contact information. So, we're not asking for anything for free. We just want to go buy some lumber.
Bulk orders.
Bulk orders. Yeah. So. Hopefully we're going to get started here pretty soon. That's the goal, is to get started. Well, you came bearing something. I actually have something for you. Okay.
What?
Yes, I have something for you. So
it's your birthday, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Happy birthday. Trav is really freaking old.
I am older than Dr. Rob, in case you're wondering. I did tell Chad to give me a double X shirt. That's probably going to be a little big. And I appreciate everybody's comments on YouTube. There was one earlier that said, "Hey, Trav, lay off the Ozempic." Now, Rob can vouch for me.
You're not taking it.
I'm not doing Ozempic. This has all been eating a lot healthier.
Because do you know what Ozempic is?
A drug that I take a shot on. That's all I know Ozempic is.
It's expensive.
It's very expensive.
It's crazy expensive.
Now, I'm lucky because with my radio show, I'm doing an endorsement. So I'm actually getting paid to lose weight, which is nice. But if you want to know the weight loss program I'm using, it's called PhD Weight Loss. And just go to myphdweightloss.com. You can get a lot more information right there. But this has been just eating right. I haven't been drinking. I did drink some vodka with you the other night.
You have sadly drank.
Very minimal.
Like I completely shamed you into trying a couple of beers. What was that, a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah.
You had we're talking 4 ounces. I think I've seen you drink maybe 4 to 6 ounces of beer total.
Yeah.
In the last, 4 months?
4 months. I think April I stopped drinking beer. I'm a candy addict, man. I love gummy bears, sweet tarts, Sour Patch Kids, these Skittles. That's my weakness. I haven't had any candy in 4 months. So that's been the hardest thing for me.
You look good.
Thank you. I'm down 42 pounds.
Now, what is the goal before you hit that maintenance?
2 more pounds. I'll be at 200.
Okay, so 44 is the final.
Yeah.
Well, congrats. You look very sexy. I know you like to hear that from another guy.
I do. Now, I got a package at work the other day, and I'm like, who sent me this package? Because it was all damaged. You can tell it had been traveled a little bit, right?
We're getting packages all over the place.
We are. Now, I think you're going to like this one. When I told Owen about it, I think he was moved by it. I was moved by it. Travis and Rob, I love your show. Thanks. I spent the last year in Iraq and thought it would be cool to fly a flag on our base in honor of the great work you all do bringing Husker Nation together. I really appreciate that you guys cover every subject under the sun, but never talk politics or even touch on all the hot button topics that come up in the news. By the time you get this, I should be home, getting close to home. I hope that you will encase this and display it in your new studio when you get it to open. So here is an American flag with a certificate of authenticity that it flew. You can read that. This flew on the base in Iraq. Go ahead and read that. I mean, I was so touched by this. And that's from Brad Warnick, Sergeant First Class. Brad.
El Asad Air Base in Iraq.
Yeah.
Dude, this is big time. I'm totally touched by this. This is really cool. So the accompanying flag of the United States of America was proudly flown on July 24th, 2024 over the 117th Medical Company Roll 2E in honor of Doc Talk Sports.
And look what it said, in the face of the enemy.
At Al-Assad Air Base, Iraq, over the 117th Medical Company Area Support AMCAS Roll 2E, illuminated in the dark by the light of justice and bearing witness to the sacrifice and courage of those men and women fighting extremist forces that threaten the freedom of the United States of America and the world. On behalf of Sergeant First Class Bradley Warnick, Al-Assad Air Base, Iraq. That's awesome.
That is so awesome. You know, we've received a lot of stuff. Meat, beer, shirts. I'm going to be honest, I don't mean to pay favorites, but that's is really cool.
Actually, that is really cool.
And here's what, Rob and I have been doing this since 2002, 2003. So we've been together over 20 years broadcasting. When we started doing this podcast, thanks to Dave Remington, because it was his idea when we both got a television. We get on here because we just want to have a conversation, right? You and I just want to have a conversation and talk about stuff because, well, we enjoy talking to one another. But you don't realize how many people actually listen to it and what it means to them. And when you get something like that, you're like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool.
That's actually really cool. Well, hugely appreciative to Sergeant Warnick, both for what he does for our country and for taking the time to show that level of appreciation. That's real. I mean, that's pretty damn cool.
Oh, and I think I just figured it out. You're right. It is the cord. So we've been getting a lot of people complaining on YouTube and some other places that they hear like this ping pong sound, and everyone's like, "You're using Walmart headsets." Trust me, these headsets aren't Walmart. They're very expensive. But I think what's happening is every time I move my neck, the cord moves, and you hear a little popping sound. So it's more me than it is you. I think it's my skinny neck now is allowing for it, because every time I go like this is where that popping sound comes from.
So you're saying I'm fat?
No. I think it's just the way I move. So I'm going to try to. I'll try not to move as much.
You need to move more athletically. Now that you're skinny, try and be a little more athletic.
I'll try. I was athletic at one time in my life. I'm not very athletic now. I feel a lot more athletic in my G-Defy shoes. I went for a nice 3-mile walk yesterday. Dr. Rob and I are both. Look at that. Put your G-Defys up there. You got a much bigger foot than I do.
I think I probably walked 3 miles, but it was...
Holy crap, your foot's big.
Yeah, I was all over the Augustana campus yesterday up in Sioux Falls. The... G-Defy served me well.
See, and G-Defy makes your feet feel great. It's like you're walking on air with their Verso Shock technology that really alleviates pain in your ankle and your foot and just helps you walk better, helps you feel better.
Low back.
And your lower back. So if you want to get yourself a pair of G-Defy shoes, go to gravitydefier.com. That's gravitydefier.com. And at checkout on an order of $100 or more, you're going to get a $20 discount by just using the promo code Doc Talk. That's the promo code Doc Talk at checkout at gravitydefier.com. They've got lots of styles. You can get athletic shoes, work shoes. Hell, you can get some sandals if you want them. And they do have a 60-day guarantee. If you don't like them, you can send them back. But we think you're going to like them. So enjoy your Gravity Defiers, get your G-Defy shoes, and start feeling better during your workouts. Dr. Rob, let's just cut to the chase. We've ignored it for the first 8 minutes of this podcast.
I'm trying not to talk about it.
You and I actually watched the game together.
We did.
We spent Friday night together. Is that the first time you and I have ever watched a game together?
No, there's been a couple. I've come over to the basement.
Yeah.
Watched a couple Husker games there.
We were at Field Club of Omaha, and we sat and watched the game. And by the way, I like watching games by myself. If you're a fan, and this is why I don't go to bars, because I get being excited. You don't have to be excited on every single stupid play, right? I mean, every time, good or bad, you're don't have to.
You're talking about the table two tables down from us
like
Friday night.
Every play, I was exhausted by the end of the game. I was ready to leave going, okay, I can't take this anymore.
I like minimal distraction when I'm watching a football game.
Yeah,
I really do.
And you were watching pretty intently. I'm just going to come out and ask you this, and it can be a combination of both. But the more I've been able to think about it, Matt Rule was outcoached. Brett Bielema outcoached Matt Rule.
I think a couple of things. One, I do think Bielema outcoached him, which it's kind of a Bielema thing. It's almost like he'll pick 2 or 3 games a year, and he will just outcoach the living hell out of whoever they're playing. And then all of a sudden that ability to do that kind of goes away the rest of the year. And and I say that it always seems like one of those games happens to be Nebraska, that he does that. And it doesn't, whether it's Rule, Frost, whatever, I always kind of feel like he pulls out all the stops. It's almost sort of one of these, the fact that it seems like he always does this to Nebraska. I mean, this is even going back to Wisconsin. It's almost like it's this weird, he's taking out some aggressive daddy issues against Barry Alvarez, knowing that Barry was a former Husker. But I thought Nebraska got outcoached, and I thought it was on multiple levels, offensively and defensively last night, which is kind of surprising because it was one of the few games where you normally don't see a guy like Tony White get out coached. Because even in the losses last year, I thought Nebraska's defense was the strong point of the team, and I thought that was what kept Nebraska in. A lot of these games against some very good opponents last year was Nebraska's defense. It was Tony White's prep and coaching. I just don't feel like they were ready for that game. And I don't know if it's a short week thing, if it was a Friday night thing. But I mean, as much as you got to give credit to Illinois and Illinois' coaching staff, when I go back and look, I just thought Nebraska did not look ready. They did not look mentally ready for that game.
How could that be? You have the 400th consecutive sellout. You have a Friday night atmosphere. You have a national ranking. You know the performance you've had against ranked teams. It's all up. It's teed up right there.
And you've had, and it's not like Illinois didn't have game tape. I mean, it's 4th game of the season, so you're seeing these guys. You've seen these guys on film this year. It's not like it's a new team out there, first game of the year kind of thing. That's not the situation where you're sitting there going, well, it's a new coach, it's a new team. How are these guys going to show up? What are these guys going to look like? That's always interesting to me when you get a team that's got tape on them. It's not like you haven't seen Bielema coached Illinois teams in the past. There's plenty of material to prep with. And I just felt like those guys weren't ready. It's like Illinois came out and threw stuff that we've never seen Illinois do.
Let's say Nebraska had taken 3 steps forward in its first 3 games of the season, and it was like 3 steps backwards, maybe 4 steps backwards against the Illini.
Now here's the other thing. I'm not sure I'm ready to just screw it. We're pulling the plug on the season.
I agree with you on that. But it was a step backwards.
It was a step backwards. I'm not sure it was that huge step backwards. I do think there were some very specific things. A lot of it mental that needs to get cleaned up and needs to get fixed. And this game exposed some of those weaknesses, some of these things that Nebraska is going to have to clean up going forward. But when I look, big picture, in terms of where Nebraska's at, so let's forget the fact that it's Illinois, okay?
Okay.
So forget that it's Illinois, forget that it's Bielema. If I just said, hey, let's go back to July. And I said, after 4 games, Nebraska is going to be 3-1. The one loss is going to be to a top 25. I think Illinois is probably going to be top 20 come next week. I mean, I could see them moving up 19th or 20th. I got to look at the rankings and see who in the kind of in that 15 to 25th. I got to look and see who won, who lost, what everybody did. But they're going to at least move up a couple of spots. I think Nebraska drops out, but I think Illinois is going to probably move from, they were 24th? So I could see them going anywhere from 20 to 22 after that game. So if I had said in July, hey, Nebraska is going to be 3-1, and the one loss is going to be in overtime to a top 25 team, to a 4-0 top 25 team, I think most people are going to sit there and go, oh, okay, I can, that's pretty good. I think most people, if you had said that in July, 3-1 overtime loss to a top 25 team, I think most people are fine with that. So, is it a step back? Yeah, I don't think it's 3 steps back though. And I'm trying to find some positivity here. I'm trying to put a little silver lining around the cloud by saying, well, yeah, it's an overtime loss to a top 25 team. And I think Bielema, for the most part, is a pretty darn good coach. He's shown brilliance at times as a coach. This was one of the games that I actually had as a loss. I mean, when we were at the start of the season, when we were going through and going, okay, where are the wins, where are the losses? The over-under was, 7.5? And I picked the under. I said 7. And I said 7, and you're like, well, that's picking the under, Rob. And I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm going with the under. We're still right there where I thought Nebraska would be. I had Illinois as a loss, and the reason I had them as a loss is because I don't like to underestimate Brett Bielema. And I think he's a pretty good coach. I worry about his recruiting.
Well, Champaign-Urbana is not the easiest place to recruit to.
It is. I mean, you can say that about Lincoln. I've been to Champaign. There's nothing there. There's a university. There's not much else.
I think what concerns me, especially on defense, and I'm with you with the Tony White thing, and Tony White took a lot of criticism on the social media channels after the game. And you can talk about scheme. Here's what I was shocked at, is the fundamentals and the development. This team does not tackle very well, and it just seems to be out of place. I thought the tackling really all year has been brutal, but it was bad, really bad against Illinois.
But again, that's different than what we saw last year. I mean, that was a strength of this team. The defense was a strength of this team. The tackling was pretty darn good in the Colorado game, I thought.
Colorado's not very good.
Yeah, but they've got some really good athletes, and Nebraska shut down the guys they needed to shut down in that game.
Speaking of Colorado, did you see that finish last night?
No, I was driving back from Sioux Falls.
Dude, you have to go back. It's a Hail Mary. They forced overtime on a Hail Mary, and they had 2 back-to-back Hail Marys. One was dropped. It was right in his hands. They come back with another Hail Mary, and it goes for a touchdown to force overtime. It was unbelievable.
Well, that's my point. They've got guys that can do damage, and that's why I always worried about Colorado. But yeah, the tackling was a huge issue. The defense on the whole was a huge issue. We'll talk about it in the diagnosis. But that first play in overtime by Illinois, Nebraska's defense, literally half the defense looked like they were out of position on the play. There was a hole that was so big. The running back is, when you've got these lanes that the running backs can go, and when you think about a hole opening up and you see that running lane, the running back has this huge lane, and instead of cutting outside and going right down the middle of this massive running lane, he's literally hugging the edge of that lane, almost running into, now they were blocked defenders, but he's almost running into blocked defenders, and he looks outside and there's this huge open space where he's like, oh, well, I'll go out here now. and gets down to, what was it, the 2-yard line or whatever on that first play. But he went 22, 23 yards, and the entire defense was off to the offense's right. There was no contain on that left side of the offense. Everybody sold out in one direction. And I'm sitting here going, somebody's got to play contained. Somebody's got to have that edge, and no one was there, and I haven't seen a good explanation for that at this point yet. And even the diagnosis, I mean, we sat in here, and before we recorded it, you and I sat here watching this, trying to figure out who's supposed to be there and why is there not somebody there. And they had it blocked well, but I'm still trying to figure out, somebody's supposed to be over there. You look at this massive hole that even the running back is sitting here going, somebody's supposed to be out here, so I'm going to hug the really tight to that one side of the hole. And it's almost like I said, he almost looked surprised there was all of this open real estate.
Well, and when you look at that play, we're talking about the very first play for Illinois in overtime. Even before they hiked the football, you can almost see it sitting there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you see this wide open space to the wide side of the field. I mean, everybody was stacked heavy against the short side of the field, and there's just nothing but running room on the wide side of the field.
And the only other thing I could think of is did Nebraska's defense see something consistently earlier in the game that had everybody going to the right? But I mean, it was a massive hole, and they got 23 yards on one play. I mean, you saw that, and all of a sudden I'm sitting here going like, this does not bode well. And overtime is one of these things where, I mean, it's sort of the whole fortune favors the bold type situations in football. Overtime is not where all of a sudden you want to get a little tentative and you want to kind of, well, let's see what they're going to do. When it's overtime, that's one of those things from a coaching standpoint. I think you got to go pedal to the metal. We're going to bring blitzes. We're going to get in the quarterback's face. We're going to bring guys and try and do some damage. If you're on offense, I think you got to take the risks. You're going to get after, and you're going to try and put pressure on that defense offensively. And Nebraska did not do that. Illinois went. And they went and grabbed it. They got after it in overtime. And I mean, you can say, well, Nebraska lost the game. Illinois went and won that game in overtime. I mean, that was watching them play, that was very, very aggressive on their part, both offensively and especially their defense in overtime. That was one of those things where they were like, we're going to go win this. We're not going to wait and see if Nebraska hands it to us. We're not going to look for a handout here. We're not going to try and play it safe. They aggressively went and got that win. You
mentioned the mental aspect of the game and that it was lacking against Illinois. Let's use the offensive overtime possession because Nebraska went backwards. It did not go forwards.
Brutal to watch.
The offense was not there mentally. Dylan Raiola wasn't there. The offensive line wasn't there.
I'm not sure. So I've been thinking about this and talking to a lot of other fans about it all during the day, Saturday. And a lot of people are like, well, you know what? He is a freshman still. It's always going to be a jump. I'm not sure I fault him. Because this is the first time when I watch him play that I'm sitting here and going, okay, I truly don't worry about him throwing the ball. He'll take some risks. He'll thread some needles. But the ball is where it's supposed to be. That first interception, I mean, that was a play where the ball was where it was supposed to be. The receivers just got to secure that is all. I mean, the ball was in front of the receiver. The receiver caught it, is pulling it in. The defender is behind the receiver. The ball was placed where it needed to be. It just kind of went through his arms as he was going to the ground, and the defender made a great, great play on that ball before it hit the turf as all that happened on that one. But that's one of those plays where it should have been a touchdown. It turns into a touchback. I don't fault Raiola for these plays that I'm seeing, the interceptions that I'm seeing. I don't fault him for that. He's putting the ball where it needs to be, and you've got a couple of highlight plays by defenders this year in two different games that they just went up and made a play. I've got a lot of trust in what he's doing. And when I say he, I'm talking about Dylan. I've got a lot of trust in what he's doing as a quarterback, his vision, and his decision making. And I know some people were faulting that in overtime. Here's the thing. You're in overtime. You're getting backed up. He doesn't have time to throw on some of these plays. The O-line has to do a better job. The wide receivers have to do a better job. Those sacks are not on Dylan. It's overtime. You're backing up. He's in a situation in that setting where he has to make a play. He has to go out and try to get positive yardage, and he's going to need some help doing that. And he didn't get it in that game. So I don't fault that overtime on Dylan, because I know some people have told me, well, God, he needs to throw that ball away. I'm not sure he had time to throw it away. And at the same time, too, throwing it away does not help Nebraska in those situations. You're already behind the sticks. You need some chunk plays, and you need to score.
We for the first time ever, we did the report card in real time, and we had the report card out when it went 0, and it baffles me. I think within the first 5 minutes, you had like 65 comments on your report card. You gave me this. We were texting back and forth. You're like, it's amazing what blows up on social media. Like, people should really be paying attention to behind the point spread, which is what we do on Wednesday night with Scott Spreitzer. That doesn't get even close to the traction your report card does. People thought you were too generous, especially with the special teams.
In hindsight, I did go back and look, and there's a lot of things I'm looking at, and I mean, it's easy to say, well, they missed a field goal. They suck. It was a bad game.
Plus, your kicker's gone. Your kicker's not kicking. Your normal kicker.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of a change. They're trying to, and I don't know what's going on with Alvano, if he's fighting some injuries, if it's a case of the yips. I truly don't know. I've seen him kick up close. I've watched that kid kick a lot, and I think he's a phenomenal talent. Let's see what happens here. But I mean, the kickoffs weren't where I would have liked to have seen them. The punting you weren't getting the distance on the punting, I thought.
Well, remember that there was a good punt, and I forget at what point of the game it was, but I said it was a great punt, but there was no hang time. Remember, I looked at you, I said there was just no hang time.
Yeah, there was that low line. It was a long punt, but it's a low one. And by the time those low line drives, you get great distance, but the coverage team doesn't have time to get there. So they ended up getting a great return just because coverage wasn't down there yet. So that's something that, again, they're going to have to work on. I would admit, I think in hindsight, I think the grades were they weren't as bad as they probably should have been. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out, and again, they work together, like that run game grade. You know, sometimes I'm looking at the running backs, the quarterback, the line. A lot of stuff plays into that. And so that might be higher than the O-line grade. Sometimes the O-line grade's up and the run grade is down. But I do think I probably should have hit the O-line, in hindsight, hit the O-line a little harder. Should have probably hit the special teams a little harder as well. The O-line grade, going back and watching a number of plays, again, just mentally didn't look like they were there. I mean, Ben Hart was out of position on a number of plays. The first sack in overtime, we go over this in the diagnosis, the offensive guards just got to come off of a tackle and stunt a little quicker. He got turned, needs to stay square to the line a little bit more, needs to slide back inside quicker and pick up that end coming around. And if he does that, Dylan's got time to throw.
You've heard Doc reference the diagnosis. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube right now, just hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or Podbean or Spotify, you can find our YouTube channel by just searching Doc Talk Sports. Subscribe, because YouTube only, you will find the Doc's diagnosis presented by Centrist Federal Credit Union. And we don't do just one play this week. We do 4 different plays on on our first diagnosis. We also take a look at Purdue. But Dr. Rob really gets pretty deep into that. So if you want to get more opinion on and really specific plays, that would be a way to do it. You know, one thing I don't like, and because it's easy, and the officiating wasn't great, but it wasn't great for both teams. I mean,
it was bad. I thought it was equally bad. So I'm kind of sitting there going, okay, well, it hurt us, but Illinois was hurt too.
Well, you remember Luke Altmaier had an Eric Crouch face mask situation.
He did, and they didn't call it. I mean, Bielema, the coaching staff for Illinois, was going nuts on that one, and they should have been. But there was a couple. There was the taunting call. There was the
late hit call too.
And I'm not sure I'd call it a late hit. I would have called that an unsportsmanlike, because it was sort of the guy came up and did sort of this hard head tap. That probably should have been an unsportsmanlike. Which either way, it's a 15-yarder.
Yeah, but you can't take still frames and go, look at this. This is a penalty. Well, when it happens in real time.
Exactly.
It's a split second. I know you want calls to go your way, but that's low hanging fruit.
Well, and here's the thing. Nebraska had, I think I counted, I believe it was 5 hands to the face / face mask calls that went against Nebraska. It was 4 or 5. I thought it was 5. And I mean, in my head, I might be thinking the face mask on Altmaier that wasn't called. I might be thinking that's the 5th one, but again, this is mental mistakes that when you're sitting here and you're looking at this and you're giving up, I mean, that's 15 yards per. That's 75 yards that you're giving up because you're getting your hand up in an O lineman's face, or you're grabbing an offensive player's face mask.
You're giving up yards and you're giving an automatic first down.
It is. That's a mental mistake. How many times over the last several years have we talked about special teams errors, mental mistakes, penalties, turnovers? The turnover thing hasn't been, I mean, you've had turnovers. They've hurt. They hurt us in this game. But it hasn't been the glaring problem. But the mental mistakes, the penalties, it's the hands to the face. I mean, that's just a technique thing. And if you're a defender, get better tackling technique. You know how to make a tackle. Quick grasping up top, get down around the legs and make a damn tackle. If you're a defensive lineman, if you're a linebacker, hand position, when you're a defensive lineman, you're coming off the ball. I understand it's easy to get that hand up in the offensive player's face. It's a hand position thing. These are technique things these guys are working on very, very consistently. You've got a great defensive line coach in Terrence Knight, and we've seen some incredible development of players when you look at Robinson, when you look at Hutmacher. These are guys that have developed very well with Terrence Knight. And I guarantee, maybe he is saying get the hand up in there to get him out of position. But these are glaring mistakes that are costing Nebraska that need to get cleaned up. And you get rid of a few of these penalties, you get rid of one of those turnovers, you get rid of one of those special teams miscues, Nebraska wins this game. And that's the thing that's frustrating about it, is because when you can go point to one turnover, yeah, that would have saved us the game. We win the game if it's not for that one turnover. One special teams miscue. Yeah, you know what? We make that field goal. Guess what? We win that game. It's a couple of these penalties. You know what? Remove a couple of those 15-yarders. Nebraska wins that game. That's the margin, and we've talked about this before. The margin for error with this team, we just found out that margin for error is still very thin. When it is a halfway decent opponent, when it's a top 25 team, when it's a solid Big Ten team. I mean, you and I were talking about how Iowa did against Minnesota, and I don't think Minnesota's a very good team this year.
They may not win another game on the way out. Their schedule's brutal. Iowa had a bad first half, played probably the best half of football I've seen Iowa play in years.
Guess what Iowa has again?
A running game.
A really good running game. And here's the thing. How many times has Kirk Ferentz gone out and won 10 games with a great running game, great defense, very good special teams? All of a sudden, everybody's like, oh, yeah, we're going to beat Iowa this year. Okay, well, Iowa's doing what Iowa's always done and what Iowa has done to beat Nebraska consistently over the last several years. Right now, Nebraska, what probably the biggest thing that got exposed in this game for Nebraska is how narrow that margin for error still is. We don't have a big margin for error. When you can look at one specific game and go, take away one special teams miscue, they win the game. Take away one of those turnovers, Nebraska wins that game. Take away a couple of those 15-yard penalties, Nebraska wins the game. That is a massively narrow margin for error.
Well, let's just look at even the first teams, okay? Because I watched the USC Michigan game yesterday, watched part of the Ohio State Marshall game, watched all the Iowa-Minnesota game. We watched all the Nebraska game.
I watched none of those. I was watching Augustana beat Northern State.
But so two-part question here, and that is I'm convinced now you have to have not just a great running game if you want to win in the Big Ten. Michigan grounded and pounded against USC. Ohio State went for like 250, 256 against Marshall. Iowa, Caleb Johnson, and you can call me an Iowa homer, that's fine. Caleb Johnson is the best running back in the country. He went for 206 and 3 touchdowns yesterday. And so
but he doesn't do that without some solid blocking up front.
No.
And that's the little bit that I've watched of Iowa football. It's the best their offensive line has looked in 2 years.
I would agree with you. So my question is Nebraska's running game where it needs to be? I think the answer is no. And then and why is that? Could it be? And should it be? You have an experienced offensive line.
It should be a lot better than it is. And I think Nebraska's offensive line, again, they got exposed a bit in this game. Now, you've got some issues here. So Corcoran didn't play. I don't know did he play at all? I thought Gatula was in the entire game at left tackle. Lutovskian was at guard. Instead of Makuza. So I'm still there's still some things here that they're going to have to figure out. I mean, I'm a little bit worried about the offensive line right now because now you're seeing some shuffling on that offensive line. You're seeing them use some different players here. And like I said, some of these guys I think are going to be very good. I think Gatula is going to be a very good offensive lineman. I think Sam Sledge is going to be a very good offensive lineman for that team. I do think Evans has been a very good offensive line. He got exposed a little bit in some pass protection. But I think Ben Scott's been a very consistent guy at center. But again, I've talked about from week one this year, I feel like Ben Hart's taken a step back. Like, I mean, that's a guy that I thought last year was a very consistent performer. Now, and when I say that, I'm not saying that I think Bryce Benhart after last year coming into this year, it's not like I'm sitting here going like, oh yeah, we're going to win the Outland with Benhart. It's like, no, I'm not saying that. It's just he went from being a guy that you could pull up his film and find just some very glaring mistakes from a technique and execution standpoint as an offensive tackle for his first few years playing at Nebraska. And then all of a sudden last year, it seemed like a lot of that got cleaned up. And I thought he played very consistently throughout the season last year and was one of those really steady performers for Nebraska's offensive line. And all of a sudden that disappeared this year. And now again, I worry about him when he's got a guy, especially if you get somebody who's a little bit of speed on him coming from that edge spot or that defensive end spot. I'm just not seeing it out of Bryce like I saw it last year. But yeah, when you come into this game and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, we got Gatula at left tackle. We got Litovsky at guard. Ben Hart still seems a little shaky compared to last year. I'm a little bit worried about their ability, especially in the run game blocking, to have consistency. Now, I'll grant Nebraska a little bit of this is a very different offense this year than it was last year. So you've got 3 different offenses in 3 years. So you go 2 years ago, it's Casey Thompson to Trey Parker as your offense, and it's Mickey Joseph and Scott Frost's guys running that offense. You go to last year, new head coach, new offensive coordinator, and all of a sudden, Casey Thompson's gone. You got Jeff Sims. You got Heinrich Harburg at quarterback. It's a different offense when those guys are your quarterback. It is a completely different playbook. It's an entirely different play calling scheme that you're going to have to use when those 2 guys are your quarterbacks. This year, well, now they got Dylan Raiola. It's a completely different offense because of Raiola. Now, I'm nitpicking a little bit here because I think Raiola's the best thing to happen to Nebraska football in the last few years.
I would agree with you on that.
I'm just saying, all of a sudden we've got a very good, very smart, very talented quarterback who can do some damage. And even in the game against Illinois, he showed, hey, we can score quickly from all over the field. He can make these throws downfield that a lot of other guys can't, and he will make those throws, and he's going to do some damage this year. So all of a sudden we got this X factor at quarterback. Well, the problem is that in 3 years we've had 3 completely different offenses that guys have had to learn. They got to develop some kind of run game, though. If you don't, in the Big Ten, you hit the nail on the head. They got to have that. And right now, they don't have that consistent running offense.
Well, and then you turn it around and look at the run defense. Nebraska can't stop the run. It can't, and you got teams that are coming up. They're gonna ground and pound, and it's going.
Yeah, well, they had the first 3 games. They did stop.
They did okay. I wouldn't say they did a great job.
But there's at one point, I think they were averaging after a couple of games, weren't teams averaging like 78 yards a game against them on the ground?
You throw sacks in there too.
Yeah, and I will give you that because, that destroyed Colorado's run numbers. You sack Shadur 6 times. That's going to screw up your run numbers. I will give you that, but it's not like they were knocking Colorado's run numbers from like 260 yards down to 200 yards.
Yeah.
They were knocking those numbers from like 120 yards rushing down to 60. If you were going to tell me, hey, we're going to hold Colorado to 100 and whatever yards rushing, then you throw the sacks in and it makes that number pretty tiny. But even if you weren't removing that yardage from the sacks, Nebraska, I thought, had still played very good. Now, the one thing I will agree with you on with that is that, again, I keep talking about these exposures. Again, Illinois might have exposed something here that, hey, against a fairly good Big Ten offense, big offensive line. You look at Geske up front there on that Illinois offensive line. They have a good O-line. That's not a bad unit. That's a very good unit. They got a big old running back.
They got a good quarter. Luke Altmaier, he impressed me.
Well, and that's what surprised me is I'm not sure people – I think, again, he's a portal guy for Illinois.
Yeah, came from Ole Miss, so he played for Lane Kiffin.
And so you got a guy who, again, little X factor here that I don't think Nebraska was counting on was him coming in and playing as well as he did. His field vision and decision-making is really good. Now, he's got a good arm. I'm not sure I'm going to call it a great arm. There's a lot of throws I don't think he can make. But, man, his field vision and decision-making in that game was outstanding. I mean, Illinois had a general on the field there running the show at quarterback.
And an older guy, too, right? So, I mean, he'd spent a couple years in Oxford. You learn under an offensive genius like Lane Kiffin, you're going to Lane Kiffin recruited him for a reason, so he probably saw those exact same things that you were talking about. Hey, do you like that color of red that Rob is wearing? Well, you can buy that color of red at Husker Hounds, 2 locations in the Omaha area. Of course, the Superstore on 84th and Center. Our good buddy Scott Strunk, I tell you what, you think I've lost a lot of weight? That dude looks absolutely phenomenal, and the better he feels, the better the deals seem to get at Husker Hounds. So go check out if you need a quarter zip, if you need a sweatshirt, if you need a hat, if you need anything that is Husker related, and that just doesn't include football. We're talking volleyball, basketball's coming up. You name it, Scott has it at Husker Hounds and online at huskerhounds.com. If you do need a lawyer, go check out our good buddy Connor Orr. He's a great litigator. He does estate planning, and he is here to work for you. And he's been an important part of this podcast because he comes on at least once or twice a year. He dabbles in the NIL world. Probably not too many people out here who want to dabble in the NIL world, but he's much more broad than that. And the firm is growing, so you can go to orlawgrp.com. That's orlawgrp.com when you need a lawyer for your litigation or your estate planning or any other legal need. So up next, Rob, is Purdue. Purdue is not a very good football team. It's just not. Purdue got beat 38-21 at Oregon State on Saturday. Week before, they got beat by Notre Dame 66-7. The only win of the year, and we're going to show a play from the Indiana State game. They beat the Sycamores 49-0. It looks to be, this will be a good, should be, I shouldn't say is going to be, it should be a good bounce-back game. And how important, Nebraska's played its first 4 games at home. How important is it just to get on the road and get the hell away from Lincoln?
I think, there's some positive that comes from that. And I think you want to have home games be that strength for you. And that was disappointing about Illinois, is that you would like to have that be a game changer. It was for the Colorado game. I think Nebraska fans got after in that Colorado game. That was a difference maker. I don't think it was a difference maker against Illinois. But, I think the fans are sitting there, it's Illinois. Who cares about them? That crowd was insane during Colorado, a little less so against Illinois. Going on the road, it can be a problem. And, there's been times that going to Purdue has been a little bit of a thorn in Nebraska's side.
Because nobody's ever there.
Well, and it's the weird that plane service seems to cause people problems. Dude, I think a chipmunk running across that turf would blow an ACL. It's just it's weird. There's like turf sharks that come up and like snap ligaments.
It looks like this really thick bluegrass. That it's like, we gonna mow this?
Yeah, it's one of the. It's nobody likes that playing surface, and you hear about a lot of teams complaining about it. And you can make the point like, do they maybe leave that turf a little bit longer to slow opponents down? Okay, well, that's going to slow you down too. So I think that's kind of a stupid argument. But the thing you got to think about with Purdue, and the thing that I worry about, is that when you look at them up front, they've got some big athletic guys on both sides of the ball. Now, that doesn't mean they're good offensive linemen. That doesn't mean they're good defensive linemen. But you've got some prototypical Big Ten type bodies up front on both sides of the ball for Purdue. And if Nebraska, this is one of these games that I look at this as a barometer game. I said earlier that I think Illinois exposed some stuff. I've seen some things that I liked a lot early on with Nebraska's offensive line, but they hadn't been against a team that was a big, strong, athletic, old-school Big Ten team, and Illinois got that this year on both sides of the ball. this is a barometer game. Is Nebraska going to come back? Are they going to be able to shore up some of those problems that I saw against Illinois in terms of both assignments, technique, fundamentals? And are they going to be able to get that run game going? Are they going to be able to keep guys out of the backfield, pick up these stunts? Because guess what? When you get exposed by somebody like Illinois, that tackle end stunt that they ran for the first sack of Raiola in overtime, other teams are watching that. They're sitting there going like, okay, well, that guy didn't come off the left guard didn't come off the tackle and get on the end quick enough, and that resulted in a sack. I guarantee you, Purdue's looking at that going, well, maybe we should run a tackle end stunt also, and let's see what happens. When you're seeing Bryce Benhart not have these really strong outings fundamentally that I saw last year, that all of a sudden we're not seeing that this year, are we going to see guys start coming after Benhart? I mean, do you remember a couple of years ago we did the diagnosis, and I feel bad about it because it was basically like circling Benhart and Corcoran.
Yeah, you were picking on them every week.
But one of those first weeks that we saw them both just get burned by some pretty basic pass rush moves, and it wasn't anything. It was nothing out of the ordinary. I mean, this is just basic, solid, fundamental football by these defensive ends that we saw a couple of years ago. And one of the things I said was, hey, watch out, because, I mean, that stuff sticks to the tape. Opponents are looking at it. I guarantee you opponents are going to be coming after Benhart and Corcoran hard. And for the next couple of years, you saw some pretty intense blitzes coming off the edge against Benhart and Corcoran because teams knew they weren't able to pick it up. You can kind of pin your ears back and go. You don't have to worry about contain as much when you know those offensive tackles might be lacking fundamentally. And that happened. Guess what? Teams are going to come after Benhart again. You're going to see teams pinning their ears back. You're going to see defensive ends coming up field, crashing hard on first down, second down plays, and not worrying about him keeping an edge, maintaining that boundary, maintaining contain of the defense. It's just, you're not going to see that now. Teams are going to get after it with him. That's coming.
This is a start of a pretty important stretch and why Saturday's game is so big, because Nebraska's got a tough stretch coming up. They've got after Purdue, Rutgers, which most likely will be unbeaten coming into Lincoln. Now, they got Washington next, but they get Washington at home. I think that's a winnable game. Indiana's unbeaten. And then you got Ohio State. So it's important to get some stuff fixed during this Purdue game. They
do. And that's, I mean, if I can find something positive here about the Illinois game, is that, okay, you've got some stuff you got to fix. You got some stuff you got to shore up. And a lot of what I saw, a lot of the problems I saw in that game, whether it was on the part of the coaches, I mean, you made the point earlier where you said, hey, it looked like they got out-coached. Okay, well, that's a mental mistake. That's a mental issue.
Does it surprise you? I mean, for as great as speaker, motivator that Matt Rule is.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I'm pausing here is that I'm trying to think of times that some all-time greats got out-coached. And I'm thinking about, like, okay, when did Tom Osborne get out-coached? And I did see a lot. I mean, there were games, we'd go into games and he'd get out-coached in the first half.
But adjust in the second half.
And then, I mean, one of the things, I was talking about this with one of my buddies over the weekend, Mark Weber, and Mark donated us the Talking Waters beer. So he's one of my Augie buddies, Kearney, Nebraska guy, big Husker fan. He was asking about that with the halftime adjustments because he said, I don't feel like we make massive adjustments at halftime. And I always thought that was something we always did under the coaches I played for. You had Milt Tenneper in the box. You had Dan Young down on the sidelines. The entire first half and then the first few minutes of halftime was Dan Young coming to us and saying over and over again, what are you guys seeing out there? And it wasn't, he didn't want to, they weren't going by what is being seen up in the press box. That's not what he was asking. He was coming to us and saying, what do you guys see? What are those linebackers doing? What are those D linemen doing? Where's that safety lining up, and what's he doing on the snap? They wanted to know very specifically, what did we see up front? And
because you can look at the press box, you can look in the sidelines, but it's not the same being up. I mean, that's actually smart, right?
Well,
because they're getting your input.
Exactly. And so we were, okay, they're doing this, they're lining up here, and when they're lining up here, here's what they're doing off of that alignment. So we could really fine-tune stuff, and you'd get in at halftime, and there was a lot of, all right, here's what we're going to do in the second half. And even if you were very, very successful in the first half, there was still that quick breakdown of, hey, what are you guys seeing? Okay, we're going to tweak a couple of things.
So what does that look like? Because I've always wondered what a halftime locker room was. I mean, is there a lot of whiteboarding? Is there a lot of discussion? Because there's not much time. You get 20 minutes, right? I mean, that's about it.
Yeah, and so we did a lot on the whiteboards. I mean, it's old school. So I mean, we didn't have the iPads or the ability to look at it real time on the screen. Which I went to the Millard South Kearney High School game. Millard South has a flat screen TV on the sideline. It's got the blinds around it to protect it, but the defense comes off the field and everybody sits around. I mean, it's like this. They sit around there and they're playing plays in real time, looking at the film and making adjustments. I mean, you've got that at the high school level now. We had a whiteboard. We had those still frame photos that they would take from up in the press box. Okay, here's what it looks like. Where exactly is that guy actually on you, or is he shading, and where is he coming? But we would pull that out and we would tell him, no, you got this wrong. He's actually over here. He's not on me. He's off to the side a bit, and he's dropping out, and they're bringing the safety. So you could sit there and in real time talk that through on the whiteboard with the coaches. And so they would make these adjustments. I mean, kind of one of the examples that this is a real easy one to give. I think it was in '92, maybe we played, and I think they were FCS, Middle Tennessee State. Yeah. They ran the old Dallas Cowboys flex defense, the Doomsday defense, yeah. Ed Too Tall Jones, Randy White, those guys. And what they would do is the Middle Tennessee State line, all of these guys were undersized. I think their biggest guy was like 260 maybe, going against a bunch of 320-pounders. They lined up far off the ball. We're running a zone or a zone read blocking scheme up front on our run plays. And every time moment one of us would take a step on the snap, the entire defense, who's lined up like a good yard away from us, an additional yard away from us, they weren't nose to nose like most teams. They got some distance away from us. So before we could actually engage them on the line of scrimmage, everybody, linebackers, D linemen, they would take off in a dead sprint in the direction that we were stepping and that the play was going. And they were kind of shutting things down a little bit. We get into the locker room. Everybody's like, what are they doing? And we're sitting here going, we're not getting a hand on these guys, because the moment we take a step, they're just sprinting laterally in that direction and getting 6-7 guys there at the hole right off the bat, right on the snap, and they're lining up so far away from us, we're not able to actually get to them and engage those blocks. And so the coaching staff made the decision. They said, all right, here's what we're going to do. And they brought the running backs over, tight ends over, quarterbacks, all of us together, and they told us on the offensive line, okay, we're going to run the same plays. It's just when you guys step and those D linemen and linebackers take off running, go chase them and just shove them in that direction all the way to the sideline. We want you to bury 7 guys on the far sideline. Running backs, You're going to take one moment you get the ball, you're going to take one step in that direction, and then you're going to hit the cutback. They did a couple of things, motion, bringing a wing back over, a slot guy in to pick up that backside safety or backside outside linebacker, crash that guy down as well. And we ended up with just these absolutely massive cutback lanes. And so we spent the entire, I think we scored 30 unanswered in the second half. And I think we were winning. We were up like 14-10 at halftime. I think the final was 44-10. So we just came out and just ran these cutbacks the entire game. But it was, you'd make adjustments like that based upon what you were seeing up
Do you
front.
think Nebraska's a good halftime adjustment team?
And I'm not, and when my buddy Mark asked me that was one of those things where it's like, God, you know what? I'm not seeing a lot of change. And I think Rule, I think Sat, I think Tony White, I think those guys do a great job with game planning. But I think they do have a little bit of an NFL-style mentality where it's, all right, here's our game plan. We're just going to do that for this week's game. And if we nail it, we nail it. And if we don't, well, we'll go back to the drawing board for next week's game. I think they're making some adjustments. Everybody makes some adjustments, but I don't think you're making these wholesale adjustments like you would maybe want to see. Now, again, in this game, I'm not sure this was a major halftime adjustment game where it's, Illinois is completely shutting us down. Nothing we're doing is working. I mean, when they were tackling, when they're getting good technique, tackling, guys were in position, the defense was working. When they weren't getting 15-yard hands to the face penalties, the defense was working. When they weren't getting face mask penalties, the defense was working. Those are mental mistakes. That's not the scheme's bad, we need to adjust mistakes. Those are in real time stupid penalties. That's slop play. I mean, it is. It's sloppy. When you're grabbing face masks and as a defensive lineman, you're getting a hand up in the offensive lineman's chin and shoving their head up and back, that is sloppy play. Clean that shit up. That's a mental mistake. That's a discipline mistake. That's a discipline-based issue. That's not the scheme's bad, we need to fix it issue. Now, in the diagnosis, we go over one play, and it's that first play in overtime. I do think there was a mental breakdown there where somebody wasn't containing like they should have been and left a massive hole on that one. But again, that's a mental mistake. I'm not sure that was a scheme mistake. I'm not sure that was an alignment mistake. That was a mental mistake by the defense on that particular play. So those are things that should be correctable.
Just going through something real quick. I'm trying to get what the actual penalties were, but I can't find it because I'm looking on my phone and I can't find it. I'm not going to worry about it.
Well, the yardage was large. I mean, you had when you're pushing into the 100-yard mark on penalties, that's a game changer.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you spot your opponent 100 yards. Look at it in the sense if that's a true offensive productivity number. So let's say you've got a game that would have otherwise, let's say you've got a game that's fairly evenly matched and both offenses put up, let's say one offense puts up 310 yards of total offense and the other team puts up 320 yards of total offense. You're going to look and it's pretty evenly matched. I'm not sure who won that game if you don't see the score. Put 100 yards on one of those and you go, okay, one team had 410 yards of total offense and the other team had 305 yards of total offense. And right there, you're going to say, well, the team that got 400 plus yards of total offense, that's who probably won the game. And you're probably right. That's what they're doing. You're spotting them 100 yards.
Nebraska's penalized 13 times, Illinois 11. Illinois was a highly penalized team coming in. Do you think the Illini got Nebraska to play their game? Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to penalties, though, that's hard to do. I think the bigger issue is just that I think Illinois' run game was working fairly consistently. Here's my question, and I forgot to look. This is one of my favorite stats, and I forgot to look at it for this week. So, time of possession. What was time of possession?
And I read that wrong. I'm sorry. Hold on. Let me get to that. So Nebraska was penalized. Where'd it go? Where did it go?
I got to pull up my.
It was penalized 9 times for 89 yards. Illinois 3 times for 20 yards. Time of possession, Nebraska had the ball 30-21. Illinois had 29-39.
So, I mean, it's a fairly even time of possession in that game, which is, if you watched the game, that's not how it felt. I mean, that was one of those games that it seemed like Illinois really controlled the clock in that game.
Now, I will say this, and this is where I got screwed up because I was looking at the first downs. Illinois got 5 of its 25 first downs off of penalties. 5 of its 25 first downs off of penalties.
That hurts. I mean, I really think it does, and that's one of those things where when you see that, that's a bad number. I mean, again, you're spotting them first downs. You're spotting them all that yardage. It's just... God, that's disappointing to see when you get that. It's
you gotta be smarter.
That's a game changer. But like I said, that's the thing where I was talking about. When you look at these games, that margin for error, those kind of penalty yards, that's brutal. I mean, the number of first downs total is 25 to 20. So there's your difference in first downs. It just came from the penalties. I mean, and Illinois lost. I mean, they lost 2 fumbles. Nebraska just had the 1 turnover. So Nebraska finished positive in the turnover margin. You look at the rushing attempts. I mean, Nebraska, and probably the reason it seemed like Illinois had the ball longer when in fact they didn't. I mean, it was basically even time of possession. I'm calling that even. But Nebraska, 50 yards rushing to 168, 1.6 yards per carry. Now the sacks are huge.
No, they actually, they had 100, but still only 107 yards rushing. That's
not what you. No. Nebraska needs. God, you want to see this offense be balanced. You want to see 250 yards passing and 200 yards rushing. But that's one of those things where. You got to find that consistency in that run game, and it just wasn't there. So
up next is Purdue, and Rob and I will be back next weekend with a full recap of the Purdue game. Looking forward to the Rutgers game after that. Do want to thank our good buddy Joe Hudson and David Max over there at Husker Max for help distributing this podcast. If you want Husker News 24/7, go check out the best Husker website out there. It's huskermax.com. That's huskermax.com. If you have any questions, you can always email myself and Dr. Rob, doctalksports@gmail.com. I sent you a long one. Somebody wrote. I forwarded to you. I don't know if you took a look at it.
Haven't had a chance to read it.
We've been
watching a lot of football.
Yeah, watching a lot of football, but it had to do with punt coverage, so we'll try to get to that. He goes, this might even be like an off-season one because, I mean, the question was just long and drawn out, but we'll try to get to that. Again, the email address is doctalksports@gmail.com. For producer Owen Justice, for Dr. Rob Zatechka, I'm Travis Justice. We will talk to you next week on the Doc Talk Podcast.